Dajahal, hi guys, it's Jeanet and welcome back to my channel, and today we have Brittany from Gaywatch here to help me articulate all the feelings that I am feeling after finishing The Devil Judge, because damn, that show put me through a ringer. But for those of you who don't know Brittany, she is amazing. She produces amazing content and she has reacted to almost everything I could ever desire to watch. So please go over and check. I would highly recommend Untamed, Devil Judge, Beyond Evil, which is on her Patreon. So anyway, Sasaki and Miyono, and also I think Heaven Official's Blessing might also be on her Patreon. So go and check that out as well. But anyway, as you can tell, I am a fan. I'm very happy to have her here with me. And yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy it. She is gonna coach me through the first 8 episodes of Devil Judge because I've only watched it once. She's a seasoned expert and I think I've talked enough. So yeah, we're just gonna be doing episode 1 to 8 here on my channel, and then we'll do episode 9 to 16 over on her channel whenever that goes up. We're not quite sure of the timeline yet. But yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy it. Just a quick note that there might be some audio syncing issues. That is just because we are an ocean apart and it can't be helped. So please bear with us.
Episode 1. This is the problem. This is the problem with this show, is that, you know, we decided instead of sitting down for one afternoon to sit down for 2 afternoons, in your case evenings, so that we actually had like 20 minutes to go through an episode instead of like 10. Because there's just so many things to it. And I have deliberately stayed away from your reactions, the same way I did with Kim Porsche, because I wanted to just ask you all of the things just in real time for the video, because I knew we were going to be doing this whole dissection.
I did not stay away from your reactions. I'm sorry, I have no self-control.
So episode 1, even just from the opening shot, it's like there's no way for the audience to really understand what they're seeing from the first time through. But it's very much like the image of Kang Yeon that we are being introduced to. This, you know, perfectly coiffed, handsome man in a sports car, alone, going down a very lonely road towards downtown Seoul. And they do a lot of, you know, the upside down mirrored versions of things. They really hint at all this stuff that you're going to see. And then we're presented with one of the best, you know, first episodes, but at the same time almost tells you nothing. It's like, the whole episode sets up, this is what Kang Yeon looks like from the outside, because they very much set up the perception, because Kang Yeon turns out to be a character who's all about people assuming things from the outside and what it looks like and not what it is. And they pull the same trick on the viewer, where you're looking at Yeon from the outside and you're seeing him do things without an explanation that leads you to make negative assumptions that then turn out to not be true. So they put the viewer in the same position that they put the people in the entire world of the Devil Judge, except, of course, for Kim. Kim is the only one who eventually learns who the real Kang Yeon is, and loves him and accepts him despite all of that. So episode 1, all the characters are introduced, some of them kind of rapid fire. So like, first impressions of, we'll try to stick to like the core, you know, stars and supporting cast. So like, first impressions of Kang Yeon and Kim and Jinju and all of those. Of course, the Chief Justice, whose name I can never remember, and all those people. What were your first impressions of the cast as they were introduced?
Oh goodness, this is not hard to remember. It feels like forever ago. I suspected that there was more to Suna than meets the eye. She seemed off. And then later you kind of realize that she has this like porcelain doll in a horror movie type vibe to her. Where
Yeah.
it's like she's supposed to be cute and sweet looking, but there's just something
No,
dark
my mind was
there.
blown by that description. That's so accurate. I've only been able to come up with, she's so very, like, snake-like to me. Like, there's something very still and very focused. Like, she's got the Kubrick stare down like nobody's business. And, like, there is definitely something off with her from the get-go in this very beautiful and well-put-together package. But at the same time, there's just something wrong. And to me, her whole vibe was always very snake and slithering and calculated. But porcelain doll in a horror movie. I am writing that down. Oh my god. That's perfect. This is why we love you, Jeanet. Oh my god. I have seen this series multiple times. I have been preparing to, you know, write the whole retelling fic thing that I'm doing. I have been obsessed with this show. And then Jeanet sees it once and then comes in with the perfect descriptor of one of the most complex characters in the entire show. Well done! I'm jealous. Good first impression of her. The others...
So I liked Judge O at the start, like in the first episode, but also her eagerness to please was an immediate red flag. I thought we were gonna have her becoming very self-obsessed, just from like the cues that we got in the first episode, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't go that route. Like, it almost went that route.
They very much deliberately sent her down that path and then had her avert from it at the last second. And thank frickin' God. Because she's so charming right out of the gate. And, like, she's got a crush on Johan. Who doesn't have a crush on Johan? And, you know, like, she's just so... I think they even... they clock each other as being from poor backgrounds in the first episode, I believe. So you know that she's from more
humble
realistic. She's from a more realistic background than a lot of the people that the show is populated with. Not unlike Kim, so they have that. They have that in common. And yeah, she's just so like, she wants to work hard. She's here. She appreciates that she's here. And I didn't even. Like, I caught just a couple of little hinty things about what you were talking about, like, kind of where her arc would lead, but I didn't really, it was like I was picking up on those things, but for whatever reason, it really wasn't until she runs into Suna in a later episode where I was like, oh god, of course! Oh no! And I was fully convinced that hers was going to be just a fully negative arc.
Yeah.
And it was going to, because they set it up to look like it was going to mirror Kim and Yeon with Suna and Jinju.
Yeah, I think that. Sorry, I got very excited because that was my exact thought. Because at one point, I think it was when they were in the the head judge's room, talking about the photos that the three judges would take, and they had Suna and her seated on one side and Kim and Johan on the other side, and it was like a visual representation of what I thought was gonna end up happening.
They so perfectly set you up for that, like, eventuality. Then to have her, obviously we'll talk about her real turnaround moment when we get there later on in the series, but I love what they did with her arc, making it look like she was going to go down this one path, and then the reasons that they had for her turnaround spoke to so many of the greater themes that we'll get into about the show, that it was really just so beautifully done. And
I'm so glad they didn't take the obvious route, even though I feel like with the type of writing style that the producers have, they could have made it work and not made it feel cheap. But I'm so glad that they still didn't go that route.
It would have been a totally satisfying arc to watch. As devastating as it would have been a totally satisfying thing to see, to have actually put in the show. The fact that they averted, that they chose to deliberately subvert that, it's a really good example of an actual subversion of expectation.
Yeah.
And it's so good. And the way she's set up in episode 1 is just so delightful, while still hinting at what was to come. But again, whether or not you pick up on that is kind of like a 50-50. Like, there are certain things that you couldn't possibly pick up on watching the first episode for the very first time. But there are other smaller things that you have a chance of being like, oh, I kind of see where they're gonna potentially go. And then, of course, you wind up being wrong, because it's the devil judge.
Can I just quickly say, I laughed so hard when you said the thing about the snake, because when there's the scene with Soung in her home, and then the Minister of Justice lady comes in. She's doing yoga or something, so right before that, and I accidentally called her a spider. I was like trying to talk about her, and I called her a spider.
Another good word for her. Most definitely. So let's see, we got Ginger, we got Soung, Chief Justice. His name I could never remember. Kim's mentor.
Chief Justice Min or whatever. I'm struggling to remember the first impression because I'm so tainted by episode 16. I just watched it.
Right,
so.
yeah, you're like 2 hours off of the finale, so you've got some things happening in your head. We first meet him when Kim stops by his office for his first day, and then he gets the little tour of the general court buildings, but then the actual arena, for lack of a better word, of where the show is actually going to take place, where he gives Kim the download and kind of the opinion of what Yoan may or may not be up to. And that is how we are really initially introduced to him in that first episode.
I think my general impression was I related to him. Like, I listened to him and I was like, this sounds like the type of person I would be if I were put in that situation. And I found myself relating to him up until the second half of episode 15, where obviously his true motives was revealed. But for me, even from the start, I felt, he and I have more or less the same moral outlook on the world. In terms of that extremes in anything is never a good thing, and that I could immediately see how the public opinion being involved in courts of law was a disaster waiting to happen. So I very much agreed with his stance on everything, and he seemed like, okay, so he's kind of a mentor figure to Kim Go-eun. So that was just my general thing. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I like you, I understand you.
Yeah, I had a similar, especially in just that first episode. I was like, they did a really good job of like. It was very understandable. I was like, yeah, if I was in your position and I was seeing what was about to go down, I would have my concerns. Considering, the different things that, different reasons he had to just be suspicious, and then they were investigating because things seemed a little off. I'm like, seems perfectly reasonable. Great little, mentor character, like, to Kim, who will, very much need it. And, yeah, it was really great. It's like you're on, and he was so good. And again, just the casting for the show is ridiculous. Because he had the perfect face for this role.
Yes.
And the perfect demeanor. I was like, you are clearly an educated man who is obviously concerned with what's going on with the world around him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a judge. But even though I liked him up until there were still definitely things along the way that we will get into as we go through the episodes where you start kind of be like, now you're trying to push things a little bit. Now it's like you have entire world does about who Kanyeon is and why he does the things he does, and you are maintaining that opinion. You're starting to things a little bit, and you don't. And he eventually is like not even realizing that he's going after the person, basically, and which has blinded him to the fact that he is actually, you know, working with the person that he should. But his is a whole thing that God was I infatuated by him ultimately in the end. But they do a great job of establishing him as, completely reasonable, totally likable. You can see why, you know, Kim has been relying on him for so long. No.
And I actually, looking at him, I was like, he seems like an older, wiser version of Judge Kim. Which is so sad looking back on it then.
Oh yeah, and then I also am never sure on how to pronounce her name, but
I try, but no.
Her first impression and her whole initial connection to Kim, or your...
I really liked her. It's difficult looking back on it because I had kind of forgotten that the setup romance was a thing. Number 99. But it's interesting to me because, like, thinking back on it, I felt distinctly that, how should I put it, that Gaon deeply cherished her, and he was obviously well aware of her feelings for him. But even though he confessed to her and everything like that, and we'll talk about that more in depth later on, but I never got the sense that he genuinely loved her in a romantic way. I felt as if he thought that was the right thing to do and that he owed her that because he did love her. And it just, it came through to me even in the first episode because of the way that he treated her confession, because we see him re-listening to it, like the "will you marry me" bit, even in the first episode, and it kind of like, it hinted to me that no, he's fully aware of her feelings, but he doesn't know what he's feeling, so he's choosing to act as if he hasn't heard it.
Yeah, I was actually, the one time where I got an inclination that, because I thought they were just going to be friends throughout the whole thing. I didn't pick up that they were going for a romantic thing until much later, before the actual culmination. But not much before. But there was one moment that stuck out at me as something that actually felt a little bit more romantic, and it was him listening to the recording of her voice. I can't remember if that was in episode 1 or 2 actually, but it was very, very early on. And him, you know, being like, "Oh, she has such a nice voice," and I was like, "Oh, okay." But then everything else screamed such brother, sister, we have a very deep type of thing that I was kind of surprised they went in that direction. I very much, and even then, even when they went in that direction, it felt like exactly what you described. I was like, this feels like two people who were, for very understandable, very traumatic reasons, have become enmeshed with each other, and I understand why she views it as romantic, but it feels like he's doing it because it seems like the right thing to do. She's like the right person to fall in love with. She is the right, you know, kind of everything. And since it's her and Jung-Oh who kind of represent the, well, Julie, but they both represent like the solid white idea for and they both kind of fall into similar pitfalls as a result. Because one of the overarching themes, you know, of this show is that it is neither black nor white. It is very much gray, and you have to be willing to go into the gray, change, and go after the right people. But she, it felt like he was like, well, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Just kind of like they would always be the ones to rein him in morally as well in the beginning, when he'd be like, well, doesn't he kind of have a point though? And then they would be like, no, it's still wrong. It's still a black or white issue. He still did something wrong. And it felt like it was more about that. They do have a very deeply attachment to each other.
I loved their dynamic.
Yeah, that I found very, very fascinating and very well done. And of course, the actress who plays her, once again, there is not a single... It was like they were all born to play these roles, because she was so perfectly charming and awkward and, you know, flawed, and, you know, impulsive and trying to do the right thing. She just had this nice little charming package. So even though they decided to make it a romantic thing later, you know, she was still and she was still very, very, like, lovable. It certainly wasn't one of those shows where, you know, the main investment is in something, you know, queer or queer-coded or what have you. But then there's this compulsive hetero option that also turns out you hate because they didn't put any effort into that female character.
Yeah.
They were just like, here, they're together now. And you're like, well, this is deeply annoying. They, even though they went that way, and even though it still felt a little bit weird, they at least succeeded in making her a really full, fleshed out, you know, really great character who I
really liked her. But can I pose a question to you? Don't you think that Kim Ga-eun was perfectly set up to fall in love with her had Kang Yo-han not come along? Because I feel like that's what really blew my mind looking back on it, was it seemed like that last night before everything Kang Yo-han happened, he was set up perfectly to start discovering and thinking about his feelings towards her. And then Kang Yo-han literally came into the picture, shifted the entire focus, and he ended up going back to her, trying to get back to normal, and getting together with her was the only way he could see himself doing that.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. And that functions, just like everything on the show, on like more than one level of, he spends like the whole series, you know, he spends trying to either get back to the, you know, pure white with her, and then it gets to where he just tries to kind of have both, and that doesn't work either, from both a personal, like, character relationships and also on an ideological spectrum. Like, the white hats do not allow people like Kang Yo-han to exist, even though sometimes the world needs. And so, and that thematic purpose was a big reason as to why it felt not entirely romantic, even when it got entirely romantic between them. It was like he's still just trying to hold on to his perfectly white ideals, because he's been doing that for others this whole time. Because he's had those two people to rein him in. And then, of course, her... As you could tell, we are not caring about spoilers at all. We're talking about...
Yeah, no, sorry, I should have warned.
Yeah, no, so once again, when we get, you know, to the end of episode 13 or what have you, and she dies, even her death works on both a character relationship, because it is symbolically the death of that pure white idealness.
But it's so interesting because that episode felt like a breakup episode between Kang Yo-han and Kim Go-eun, and by extension that means that SHIYUN would have to be the rebound?
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Given everything that happens in episode 12, which is literally the breakup episode, like you cannot, there's nothing else you could call it. It is the breakup episode, right? And for Kim and as part of that push and pull, because Kim spends the entire series going back and SHIYUN both ideal wise and then also like person wise. He is pulled towards Johan, and then he's repulsed by Johan, which pushes him back over into the white hat side of things, and he keeps oscillating back and forth, and that's a classic example of there's the breakup in episode 12, and that sends him back to SHIYUN in episode 13, and then when the world finally makes the point that SHIYUNs can't really make it in this specific that we're talking about, then it sends him back on a path towards Johan. So it absolutely does feel a little reboundy on top of it.
Okay, but anyway, getting back to the beginning. Sorry about that.
God, I know. It's so impossible to just talk about the beginning without talking about the end, because it is on one hand set up so well and then yet completely masked. It's the one time where we're not given any glimpses into the real Kang Yo-han, and I realize we get that shot at the end where, you know, you see his brother with the fire in the church behind the tease of like, he's got some trauma, but we're also essentially just led to believe that he's a traumatized guy who's doing good things for shitty, selfish reasons. Speaking of first impressions, Johan, what was your first impression of Kang Yo-han? Because he shows up and he gives that very speech of two messages, essentially.
I think my first impression was very much Go-eun's first impression of, damn, this man is evil.
This man is evil.
And like, maybe not like as black and white as that, but it was very much, okay, this man is very clearly a manipulator, and he's not afraid to basically spell it out for those who are smart enough to get it. So that was my initial impression, especially with the speech that he gave. I felt like, okay, so he's literally spelling it out.
He was saying two things at the same time, which kind of perfectly sets up his entire character. It's kind of disgusting how well it sets it up. Because on one hand, he talks about, you know, power being in, you know, about the people, and about how, you know, the people and justice and all of that, and you're like, yeah. And then he's all, I am, what? What do you, wait, so do the people have the power? Or like, do you? And it's so like perfectly set up where I was like, I don't know. Is he just an asshole?
But
is he just a, you know, power-hungry asshole that we're now going to have to take down? Or is this more of a Dark Knight situation and he's trying to do something better? And then, of course, towards the end of the episode, you know, you're led to believe that no, he's actually, for a split second, they're like, no, he's not even really Dark Knight. He's more like White Knight, really. And then they have the whole yawn and tears situation. And then you're kind of back to being like, okay, so you're an asshole who's doing great things for reasons. And I was like, okay, that's who you are. And of course you have some mysterious trauma going on. But okay, it's the end of the first episode, and we have now been given, you know, this peg on this character, which is absolutely not true. We spend the rest of the series being like, who are you? Even though the show tells you who he is, actually, starting in, like, episode 2.
But it's interesting because it's interesting how you interpreted the speech versus how I interpreted the speech, because when he says the people are power and then he goes to I am power, I interpreted it as him meaning he is power, but saying to the people, I am your power. I'm your power.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I feel kind of dumb, yeah. That's absolutely true. And at the same time, it's the way he says it to where you're
so gross.
Yeah.
So gross.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you on that. Even if he's which connects the two messages, but also in a way of, but the way you're saying I am power though is a bit concerning. And he plays so perfectly to the two audiences that he has in that moment, which is the immediate people in the room, which are all the power players of Korea, but then also he's got to win over the public of Korea, and the trials haven't started yet, and the trials are his biggest way to win over the public, kind of to the point where he can do what he wants, because he very much uses public later on. But yeah, that whole opening moment with him making like his arrival, and I love character entrance, and so like the whole build
and the
up,
music,
just him entering the room, and then of course later on, it really feels like, you know, it's Johan. It's like from an ideal standpoint, is entering the stage of this dystopian country, and it's like it has gotten so bad here that now we need someone like to show up and be willing to do things that most people aren't willing to do for the actual greater good. And it's like he has now entered, you know, the arena as the real kickoff. Because I think technically they could have kind of started it earlier a little bit, because they do a little bit of like backtracking of like, we just passed all this judicial reform, and in terms of Johan's like grand plan, we kind of land not in the middle of it, but it's already done phase one. Phase one was him, you know, letting shitty people go free in order for, you know, the higher ups to be like, oh yeah, he's one of us, he's on our side, he's not going to punish people in power, and he's going to be overly harsh to the people who are powerless. And having to prove that, and then have a hand in the judicial reform that will then start this show. But they started when...
Because I was about to say, like, it's so in character for the show about Kan Yo-han to start when everyone else needs to start playing catch-up, rather than like, helping us from the start to try and figure out what this man is doing.
You just gave me such a brainwave. Yes, the show literally begins when the greater population is meant to first really take notice of him. So they are tuning in at the same time that we are tuning in, and this is all we know about Johan, because that's all the public knows about Johan, is this first speech. How? I need to talk to you more, Jeanet, because Jesus, you just really, no, that's dead ass right. Oh my god. Kim!
I loved him. Felt very like kindred spirit type thing. Like I was like, oh hell, this is what I would be like if I try and enter a dystopian society. which got me really concerned, because I know there's a reason why I was not put in a dystopian society, and it is because I would die at level 1. I absolutely loved him, and I feel like it's very interesting because we are narratively speaking always in the same boat as Kim Go-eun. And it's great because then there's someone who's like holding your hand, feeling just as enraged as you are about every single thing that's happening. And it's nice because he notices the things that we as the audience is also meant to notice, Whereas a lot of shows, sometimes the character will notice things that you didn't notice, or you will notice things that the character didn't notice. And it sort of happens a little bit at the end, as we are privy to more sides of the story than Kim Ga-eun can really know. But there's still always that uncertainty in us until the very end that's also present in Kim Ga-eun, which makes it work so well, because you get to experience everything and understand everything that he's going through, because you to a certain extent are also going through it. But also it's interesting, because I felt, as much as I was there with him, I also felt a certain disconnect, because I was lightly disassociating throughout the first episode. Because I was like, no, okay, I'm committing to the show, so I better, like, just assume that there's more to Kan Yo-han than meets the eye right now. So I was giving all the benefits of the doubt to Kan Yo-han throughout the first episode that Kim Ga-eun was not giving him. But yeah, so it was interesting, because I also like the fact that Kim Ga-eun is he's not dumb, but he's not a strategist, he's not very calculating, he's very emotional. He's not the kind of person that you would think would be able to cope in the kind of situation that he's put in. And he almost doesn't, but in a way that makes sense. And I really like that. So I very much was in the same boat as Kim Ga-eun throughout the first episode. The only thing that pulled me out of the story was a little bit, just a little bit, was him not realizing how attractive he is.
Yeah, I'm like, you have a mirror. You have looked in it. You know. You should know. No, yeah. 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 The thing about... Okay. I found Kim was... I mean, he's so relatable. And he is very much a vessel for the audience while also being his own character. As opposed to being a vessel for his audience, so they're going to make him as non-character as possible. Because you're supposed to put yourself in his shit. I hate it when people do that, and they do not do that here. Yes. He is very much his own, he's got his own things going on, but he is also a vessel for the audience. And I always have a soft spot for the poor people who go through essentially an alignment shift as part of their arc.
Yes.
And he very much has that shift from lawful good to neutral good. And it's painful to watch someone go through that. But it was so deeply, deeply relatable because I had already done that and I had already come out on the side of Kang Yo-an by the time I watched this show. So I was already there, but I will always have the memories of having to get there and the disillusionment with the country around you and realizing just how deeply broken the place that your home is and what you're gonna do with that and that whole thing that is so beautifully set up in this first episode of just dipping his toe into trying to understand what Kang Yo-an is and why he is the way he is, and trying to, again, navigate, and yet kind of not, because he's not equipped for it. He does learn quite a bit by the end. He learns enough, and his arc has enough growth to it that he becomes the person capable of going off and doing the job that he's essentially given by the end. But it was something recognizable just right away. You introduce us to Kim, and I'm like, oh, I know who you are, and I get the sense of what you're in for because we know from a narrative standpoint that you're in a dystopia, and you're not acting like it yet. And if you don't start acting like it, you're in trouble, man.
Yeah.
So, no, you should, yeah, he's the one that, you know, you love right from the get-go. And they made him very, very understandable right from the get-go, which was great, because Kanyeon is the thing that nobody understands until the last episode. Because you're meant to go back and forth on it as much as Kim does. And boy, didn't I. I really did. I fell for every trap the show laid out for me. In terms of Yohan. I did everything the show wanted me to. I made all the assumptions that they wanted me to make, and I went back and forth all the times that we were supposed to go back and forth. The show played me perfectly. Just fuck.
I can't remember if the show played me perfectly. I just, with the final 2 episodes, I was clinging onto Kanyeon being a good person, like someone would a raft in the middle of the ocean, and I refuse to let it go. I refuse to let it go.
Yeah, it was not until the end of episode 15, which is where we really get kind of the verdict on who Kanyeon really is at his absolute core. And we finally get that definitive answer. And it is very much a Dark Knight situation in a lot of ways. He has no problem with people perceiving him as a villain, and he uses that to his, to his advantage. And after that, like, up until then, it was so funny, up until then, I was clinging on to that raft of Yohan being ultimately a good person and it being a Dark Knight situation through the whole time. Like, that's what I was so deeply rooting for. Like, on one hand, I also would have been down if they wanted to make him ultimately, like, an asshole for whatever reason. It would have been a very different show. But I also, like, kind of would have been down for that, because that's very dark and that also has a lot of really fascinating things about it. But I was in that raft right along with you, right up until the end of episode 15, where I was like, oh, okay, that's who he is. We can relax now. Now, I just want him to be okay. And a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, no, but it's just, there's so much to talk about with him. But it's interesting to me because the show very much has that thing of it could go either way at any given moment. And that made it so difficult anticipating the final episode, because I could see both of them dying. I could see neither of them dying. I could see one dying and the other one, like, being absolutely tortured by it. I could see the one sacrificing himself for the other. It was just like... And then I told my mom, because she's the only person that I can rant to about this. I was like, I think they're gonna go with both of them surviving, because every single time that you think the show is gonna go just a little bit too dark, it pulls back. And I hope that their ultimate message is there's always hope, which would have both of them staying alive. And then I was like, I don't want to be too optimistic. We're gonna assume the worst and hope. Assume the worst and hope for the best.
Oh, yeah, very much so, yeah. And they really play that, they play on that anxiety throughout the whole show. And going back and watching that first episode, now that you know everything, is it's a trip and a half, because it's where you really, it really brings into sharp relief the game that Yohan is playing, and in all the different ways that he's playing it, the point at which, just from ground zero, from their first meeting, Yohan already had, you can see in hindsight that Yohan already had Kim picked out as a distant possibility, but he was like, he might be meant for the team. He might be meant for my team. A distant possibility, we'll see how it goes, but locked Kim as a possible member of the team, and then as it goes, you can see when Yohan starts realizing, no, he may actually be the guy who stayed. And you can really see his recruitment in action in those first 8 episodes. that starts immediately. It actually, the moment it really starts is after the when, you know, he fires on purpose to make the guy swerve, and it's that conversation that that Kim and Yohan have, because Yohan's going into his office, and Kim, you know, asks him about shooting the driver, asks the detail about, like, why did you, he has a question about it, and you see, it's the way that Yohan turns around and keeps the conversation going, where you can just see into his brain, he's like, okay, for you, Kim, let's see how you do. Yeah. And so he lays out this hypothetical of, I needed him to swerve, and then there's the whole saving 2 lives versus 1, and that's as simple as it is. It's just math. Even though Yohan both doesn't believe that, yet also believes that, he's saying it for Kim's benefit. So many things he does in the early episodes is literally just for Kim's benefit. Whenever he's particularly awful, he's being awful because he's trying to provoke Kim. He's trying to be like, look, I'm an awful asshole. What about it? Because if you're going to do something about it, then that's how I know that you could...
Yeah. And also, you spoke about, like, the bus scene and the 2 versus 1, but it's so interesting because that's the words he's saying, but the actions he's taking is, I'm gonna find an alternative that saves both the 1 and the other 2.
Yeah, which feeds into look at what he does, not necessarily what he says, especially in regards to Kim. Because what did he actually do? He saved everybody. But what did he say to Kim? Oh, 2, you know, I could save 2 lives and he could have turned over and exploded. And it would have been, there's so much duality with him and like does. And it's incredibly apparent in that first episode, especially in hindsight, which is why it's like impossible to talk about the first episode without talking about let me hear your thoughts on this first opening.
Okay, before we do that, quickly, I do want to mention/ask, what were your thoughts on the immediate juxtaposition in the opening sequence of the show? So, Kan Yohan in a fancy car on his way to a fancy ball, and then you see the virus and the poverty and because that very much to me was giving Hunger Games in the capital kind of vibes.
That was once again another look at what's actually going on and not what the guy is currently telling you about, because it's in the midst of this histrionic presidential speech about how there's no more poverty and the virus is over, and what you're being shown is clearly not the case. So perfectly, you know, sets up so many things about the show, but you kind of automatically dial into, okay, that's the kind of game that these assholes are playing. It's a dystopia that's trying to convince the citizens that it's not a dystopia. And we're just gonna gaslight people enough to where they think that, to where at least enough people can think that the great way they just in that whole opening drive up to the courthouse, they already set the scene so flawlessly, and they have Yohan cutting through and driving through all of it, the nicer parts, the shittier parts. Yeah, it really, that absolutely stood out to me on first. Yes, the trial. This first trial, which gave me I don't know if you've seen that film. Yeah, it was very bad water. They poisoned the water. They lied about it. They even pulled the water trick that they pull in Erin Brockovich, which is, it's like, oh yeah, in Erin Brockovich, it's very much, oh yeah, that's the water that's from the town, by the way. And then you watch all the lawyers' faces go pale, right? Which point made. And they pull the same thing in that first episode with making the guy think that he had drunk the sample water.
It's interesting to me because I watched that and I very much kind of made the connection to that case. But watching your reactions to the first episode made it stand out to me how many times they reference things that I think specifically occurred in America. It was surreal because obviously South Africa and I'm a little bit removed from everything, but it was interesting. As soon as you made some connections, I was like, okay, yeah, no, I can see a lot of different cases that I know like took place in America or something like that being referenced here. So that was very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I was both surprised and not surprised just at the whole president show. Mm-hmm. And just the whole way that he was handled, who was very directly, obviously, a Donald reference. It was so interesting. A South Korean writer write that character that parallels something that happened. I don't think I'd ever seen commentary, inspiration done in that way before, from that perspective, as someone who's watching another country's take on what my country had to go through and how he got it so freakish.
But it's so weird though, because I actually didn't immediately make the connection between the two. Like once you'd said it, I could see it. But my first commentary, I think, on the president was just, he seems like a dictator and I can't take him. Can you please stop shouting?
Yeah, that's pretty much. Mm-hmm.
So like I was gonna make a joke about me knowing who your favorite character is and it being him, but I can't even stomach the thoughts. Oh my word! I think he was my least favorite character.
No, yeah, he They did too well, frankly, and especially since, you know, it was, I watched The Devil Judge towards the end of last year, 22. Mm-hmm. So we had gotten, you know, a full couple of years post that, but it's still, man, they did it too well, and it's just, I still got, it was obviously not literally the equivalent of PTSD, but man, it was like having to listen to him, and it just really, they did it too well. Once again, they found the dead-ass right actor who did it so well, and it was written, they got Donald fucking level, including one that actually Americans don't usually attribute some of the things, how he chooses to behave in public is actually calculated, and that he seems very, and that on one hand he is very chaotic and dangerous and scary, people around him, and he knows how to play the game to where there are certain things that he very much does on purpose. He wants to come off as totally chaotic because that gives us anxiety, because now it's like he's unstable. What's he gonna do to keep you off balance like that? And they had moments where they had President enough times to where it's like he would do something completely outlandish and say something and blah blah blah, and then the cameras would shut off and his wife would be like, that was a little and he'd be like, oh well, I did that because it makes the people think, or it makes me seem like blah blah blah. Set and costume design, all the way. So we're not yet introduced to Yohan's house, which could be something that I'm sure you talk about for about 1,000,000 years. But you said that you kind of particularly noticed a lot of the set design and a lot of the costumes, whereas I usually have a yen for and camera work. And so I have favorite screenshots of favorite shots from each of the episodes. But off the top of your head, was there any particular set or costume from episode 1 that really jumped out at you? Probably something Suna wore.
Her wardrobe was perfect all the time, like her style was immaculate, and it kind of made me angry that I liked the style so much when I didn't like the character. But actually, in the first episode, I wasn't as keyed into the wardrobe as much. The set design more stood out to me because of kind of like the framing to certain things, especially obviously with how they quickly built in a lot of information about the society, and the dystopian world that we were in, like the posters about the virus and everything like that. It was very common tricks, shall I say, but it was very effective, and I feel like it was placed in the correct way, that it didn't feel like overly exposition-y. So that was good. It's interesting to me because even looking back on it, I can now see that they really amped up on Judge O's mousy appearance in the first half of the show. And also I kind of wonder if, because I think in the first episode during the dinner party, Suna was wearing like a baby pink dress, which again kind of like exemplifies that, oh, you know, she's delicate, she's not a threat, don't even look at her, you know, she's kind of under the radar vibe. And then Kanyo-an, I mean, he had the power suit on and he was strutting it. Are we surprised? So yeah, no, there wasn't a lot in the first episode, but the second episode is where things got really interesting, in my opinion. One thing I did want to get back to, because you said the end of the first episode kind of hinted to, okay, like tragic backstory, all of that. But is that weird that that's not at all what I got from it? It's so strange because my thing is I kind of fixated on the devil part of the title.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw it in almost like a biblical sense, where Kanyo-han was here down in hell, like trying to sort out the demons, and then there's this one bright spot in his field of vision, aka Gaon. So yeah, that I didn't even think about trauma at that point.
We were like, yeah, well, clearly he's seeing, you know, Kim with flames around him, and it's a whole, which, I mean, you are right. You are very much, they do a lot of things with levels and having one character being above the other at very key points in time. That, especially at the very end of episode 1, is an absolutely key moment of, yeah, Gaon being above him, looking down on Yoan in hell, and almost like he was looking up to and aspiring towards, or literally reaching for, as he does. And we don't know that at that point in time, it's for the brother he couldn't save. But at the same time, he's still, it bleeds together a lot of all that. But you were still absolutely right. That was definitely an aspect of that moment. And yeah, you don't know who, you know, technically who the guy standing among the flames is, but you get a sense that it's like not literally supposed to be Kim, or like, is it supposed to be? I kind of got the impression that like not, because they had him behind and like standing among the flames, and then of course there was that shot that actually wasn't in flames, but they're standing in the church and they're looking at each other, and I'm like, I don't know what kind of metaphor you're going for right now. But me not knowing is putting me in a really ambiguous place at the moment. And
I love that.
How did you take before I get to the technically 2 screenshots that I have for this episode, when the yawn happened, what became your kind of new understanding or guess or interpretation of Yoan's character?
It was very much, I think, exactly what they wanted me to think, which was, I had like some, I think I said something to the effect of, before that happened, I said something to the effects of, okay, so he's clearly not, like, what he's doing isn't good, but he has good intentions, or he's doing it for the right reasons, more or less. And then we see the yawn, and I was immediately thinking, okay, so, it's all calculated, it's all for show, and basically what we're getting here is that he's only allowing Kim Ga-eun to notice that this is a mask. But yeah, so unfortunately, I was missing a big chunk of introspection at that point.
No, yeah, when I say the show played me like a fiddle, that is absolutely right. I was like, oh, that's where we're going. Shit, okay. Shit, but okay. And then everyone was wrong. There were a few really amazing, I mean, the show in general, the camera work and the film composition in the show is absurd. It's ridiculous. It is so well it is extremely well filmed and just everything. So there are actually a couple of honorable mentions for, like, I guess, favorite frame of the first episode. One definitely being, there's this fantastic shot, wide shot of Kim's apartment, the walk up to Kim's apartment as SHIYUN arrives, and she's at the bottom of the stairs, and, like, the coloring is amazing because his apartment isn't very blues beautiful, and everything else in him is very reds, so it's very much like the one, shining light in hell kind of thing. And that is a stunning shot that I never caught before. There is, of course, the great shot at the end where it's over Yoan's shoulder and it's looking at Kim, and then behind Kim is the imagined projection of Isaac and the fire. And that's a stunning shot as well. But actually, the two that I wanted to bring up, and I am cheating, I do have two, you can't appreciate one without the other, is the way they went out of their way to establish Kim's arrival and leaving from the courthouse and kind of the upper elite world. So when we first see him, he is literally taking an escalator out of the darkness to the right, up into the bright white, perfection look of the majorly upper class, like the wealthiest of the wealthy. And we see him ascend from the depths of a much more impoverished, poor, struggling location and lifestyle. But and, like, we're introduced to him there when he's on the train, and we see him journey from there up into this world, really in this shot here, which is then further illustrated by the shot later when he's coming home from his first day, and they literally show him descending on. He's not being carried. He's not being escorted up into the heavens by the escalator. Now it's this, set of cement stairs that is covered in yellows and mostly like a pinkish red as he literally descends back into his actual neighborhood. And just those two shots together are a great example of the type of themes and thought that they put into the images and the set and the costumes and everything. This very much being a show where the color of the curtains does actually matter more often than not. And so out of a couple of really good choices for this episode, but I had to give a shout out to the literal, ascending and descending into the upper stratosphere.
But it's interesting as well because, like, I didn't see the images before our discussion now, and it's interesting these two that you chose. The one where he's like going up the escalator is very like open and well lit, while the second one is very claustrophobic almost.
Yeah,
everything is pressed to one side.
They have him all pressed. And just the fact that they had him, and I mean, obviously on one hand it makes total sense. Obviously, you go to work in the morning, you come home at night, but they really like weaponized that. Because in the beginning it's all shining light, and then now it's all just dark and very oppressive feeling. Because they shoved almost everything in the image off to one half, actually a little bit more than that, one half of the screen. And yeah, everything that's just communicated just in those two shots is absurd. Just pure levels of absurdity.
And you have the nice little feature of the I don't know how you say that, the app that they use for everything, for all the voting.
Oh yeah, the Dyke app being, you know, advertised behind him. Yeah, they've got a whole line of ascending ads for the Dyke app. And actually just the ads that are in the background a lot in this show say very telling things at just the right moments. And on one hand, I really appreciate that the subtitles I have would give us the translations, and I really wanted that because apparently that was really important. I just wish that they had put it like somewhere else, because in the subtitles I had, it would like appear right in amongst the dialogue, and I'm like, wait, I'm trying to what? But yeah, I wish there was a version of the subtitles that had him actually like up near the actual advertisement, or just not in with the rest of the dialogue, because what's in the ads in the background is so important to whatever scene that it's appearing in. We did not talk about, and I cannot believe we cannot go on to episode 2 before we talk about the fucking necktie moment. The whole neck moment. The whole night planting the bug. We can't, I would be doing my whole channel and my entire existence a disservice if we did not talk about that neck moment. Go ahead, talk about it. I have thoughts. I want to hear yours first.
Oh goodness. Okay. No, I have to put a quick disclaimer here, because I originally watched this as a tier 2 reward. The first episode I watched as a tier 2 reward on my Patreon, which meant that it was solely meant to be a first impression with no like follow-up reactions at all. And that it was in the month that the show originally released. So then so that's also why my episode 2 reaction is very confused, because I hadn't rewatched it before I watched the first episode. I was going off of my memory alone, and after like a year of not watching it. But so I was very much like, okay, I don't know if the ship is a real ship, if it's a fake ship, like if it's just like a figment of our imaginations. So I'm just not gonna address it. But heaven, if I tell you, I struggled not to side eye the camera at that point.
I mean, like, I knew going in that they had won like an award that apparently doesn't exist anymore, but they like literally won like the award in South Korea for like best bromance of 2021 or something. And I was like, that alone gives me an indication that there would at least be something for fandom to latch on to, right? But then again, you never really know whenever people come screaming, to you about this new ship. There's never really any way of telling, is it something that's going to be really blatant up in your face, or something more that we have to, like, extrapolate from. And I'm fine either way. But you just kind of have to wait and see. And when I fucking tell you, I've seen this show so many times. That's not even the gayest thing to happen in this show. And yet, something about that moment renders me fucking speechless. And like red blushing. Like, who could think about that moment without just devolving into this? Because like, I mean, the entire implication, and I watched the first episode with really bad subtitles by accident.
Oh.
They were just really crappily done subtitles. But even with the bad subtitles, just the implication of that, there were so many ways that they could have done that that wouldn't have implied, you know, oh, you live alone, as in you don't have a girlfriend, as in you must definitely be queer, as in, hey, look, so am I, let me prove it by dragging my fingertips across your collarbone, right? Like, there were so many ways they could have played that to where you didn't get that impression. But they actually decided to do it that way. And to turn laundry into an innuendo.
But like, I think it hit me more the second time I watched it, because then by that point I was fully on board with how queer the show was willing to be. But it's so funny thinking about that now, because I have to mention it now because I think I'm gonna forget it by the time we record the video for episode 9 to 16. Sure. I should have known Kanyohan was back and alive when he seductively dragged his fingers across the back of a black couch that Kim Go-eun was sitting on for no apparent reason.
None whatsoever. You want to know what's funny? Very quickly about that moment, I was so on cloud like fucking 9 about it, and I was just so everywhere about everything that I had just seen that for a few seconds, I guess my brain wanted it so bad that it tricked itself into an alternate reality for a second, because for a few seconds, I legit thought that Yoan had dragged his arm across the back of Kim's shoulders. And that it wasn't the chair.
I almost thought that as well.
Right? Good. At least I'm not alone. But like for a few seconds, that's what I thought I had actually seen. Which wouldn't have been crazy considering the neck moment in episode 1. That is not like above him. You know?
And don't forget the like classic Japanese pressing against the wall trope that they usually do.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah. And like, what kind of... Yeah, it's like, that's when really... I mean, their first meeting was already like, what? Because you don't know about Isaac. You just know that at the end of the scene, you know that Kim apparently looks like somebody. Right? And that's all you get. But for that first scene, you already had the handshake moment, which was already like...
Yeah.
I mean, okay. But then for a first episode, you're like, yeah, that's probably all we're gonna... No. All of a sudden, we're pushing people up against, you know, bookshelves and turning laundry into, like, ironically, the, like, filthiest innuendo I've ever seen! I cannot wait to recreate that moment in text form. Let me tell you, I have such plans for that moment. Like, if
just send them on to me as you're going.
Oh, you want to be a beta? You can absolutely beta this. Episode 2, where Youngmin starts terrorizing. Well, continues terrorizing people, really, and being a general piece of shit. It's pretty much part 1 of kind of his 2-parter, with episodes 2 and 3. There's the event that Yoan takes Judge O to. At the very beginning, there's the dinner with all 3 judges, which is another kind of test for Kim, really, and the very, like I had previously mentioned, Yohan being like, yeah, look at me, aren't I an asshole? Doesn't it just make you want to do something about it? That was a very, very clear moment of that. You get some flashes about Yohan's past, and then we get to hear from a priest, no less, about what
Yeah.
Johan did to the kids who treated him like shit when he was in like grade school. Just to start off, whoever they got to play young Johan, one, deserves
So
awards.
good.
Two, did you like grow him in a lab? Because like nobody else could have done that. That was the perfect kid to find for that. Jesus Christ.
But also it's kind of it was shocking to me how much the actor who played Kan Johan and the actor who played Kan Johan's father actually looked alike to me.
Yeah, they did very much have
like there was something very like stern about them that just it was jarring because I was like, is this actually his father? I wouldn't be surprised, but also I wouldn't put it past the show to just have happened to stumble across the perfect actor to play his father, even though it isn't actually his father.
Right? Yeah. The dinner at the very beginning with all three of them, that was like another test and everything. Yeah. Man, and even the invitation to that dinner, it was so abundantly fucking clear that our girl, Judge O, was an afterthought in that whole arrangement.
She was such a third wheel. I felt so bad for her.
Such a third wheel. And, like, I love her, which, like, I mean, to me, I was like, good. She's gonna, like, get her moment later on in the episode. She gets to put on a fancy dress. She gets to go and, like, actually, like, talk to Johan, you know? She gets to get that whole thing. But, man, in the beginning, even when he asked, he didn't even really ask her to go have dinner to celebrate. He was literally, and I've looked at this, only looking at Kim. It was an invitation for Kim that they kind of all got roped into going. And then the focus was just very on, and man, I tell you, that's the kind of stuff that I live on. That I absolutely live on. Because visually it's like, we all know what the actual priority is right now.
But maybe it's just me, but it felt like, okay, at the start, he very much obviously invited Kim Go-eun and then was like, oh, Judge O, I need to also invite Judge O. Then he, throughout the dinner, kind of starts to assess Kim Go-eun's character a little bit more, gets a feel for him. Then he realizes, okay, so me, like, forcefully approaching him about it might not be the best play to try and drag him into this. So I'm going to ask Judge O, and then, you know, it's gonna be like he has to come by extension, and then Kim Go-eun still rejects it, and I think that intrigues him. That's like, that was my assessment of the situation.
Yeah, even
because it felt like he was playing to Judge O the entire time, but side-eyeing Kim Go-eun, trying to see what his reaction is.
Yeah. Even in the invitation that that Kim rejects later, Johan's visual focus is still very much on Kim and whether or not Kim's going to be attending. He's the one to actually, when Kim just kind of isn't saying anything, it's Johan. He's like, so are you coming? He acts like, yeah, you're totally free to turn it down. It's whatever. But like, it was still very pointed of like, you're coming? No? Okay, this doesn't affect me at all, in the slightest, not at all. And you're like, yeah, okay. But then on the other hand, he treats Judge O like beautifully. Teaches her how to dance, gives her a dress, lets her keep it. You know, it's like perfectly. He's like, he treats her so well.
He does.
Which was just like
at the start, which is it's nice at the start, and then it's kind of sad when their relationship deteriorates at a point.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I hadn't thought about it before, but now it's kind of funny to me thinking of Kan Johan being like, okay, yeah, I have this open invitation to have a reason to dress Kim Go-eun, so I have to give Judge a dress, and then it doesn't work out, and then later he finally gets his opportunity to dress Kim Go-eun, and he enjoys it so much. I am projecting onto these characters way too much.
I mean, are you wrong though? I don't. You might be right. I'm just floating that out there. No, yeah, delightful. I loved, like, all the things that, you know, because JoJo got to have, like, a little bit of attention, a little bit of the, which would have been nice even after she hadn't been so clearly the third wheel earlier. But because she had to kind of get pushed aside for whatever the hell was starting to develop with Kim and Johan, it was just so nice to see, and especially to see him even, like, you know, just in the car on the way there, which I think was a really important scene to see, of Johan and JoJo just alone. Nobody's watching. He doesn't really need her on his side. She's not really factored into any of his plans. He doesn't really need her in any way. He could have, you know, he could have been, like, half as nice or more to her. He could have been half as kind and still would have, it wouldn't have been anything off of any of his plans or anything like that. But he, like, treated her perfectly respectfully. And that was one of the things that, like, season 2 is when they really start to show you who Johan actually is. But because of you don't know what you don't know, and of everything else going on, and certain other little assumptions that you're made to make, you still doubt what you're seeing in some instances.
Yeah.
So it was like, yeah, he treats her perfectly respectfully, but it's like that somehow doesn't factor in as much as some seemingly negative things that he also does. And so, like, on one hand, ultimately throughout the show, it's like, in hindsight, it's really easy to get frustrated at Kim for being like, how do you not see he's telling you who he really is right here? Because when you've, you know, watched it for the 5th time, like some people I know, you know, you can kind of start to forget, like, the first time you watched it and everything else that was going on at the time and all of your preconceived notions. But yeah, you still get played that first time, and then you feel really bad about it the second time you watch. You're like, he was right there. He was right there. What did you think? It was a really well edited moment in that first dinner when, you know, fathers come up and we get that first flash of Johan's memory, and we get that first indication that something bad happened to Johan when he was being raised. It happens very quickly, but you see just enough.
I can't remember that moment because I've only watched once.
Yeah. It's you just see they're all sitting at that table, the 3 of them at the beginning, and they start talking about, like, how you were raised, and they're like, oh yeah, because you've basically, it's like, you've been rich your whole life. You've had that silver spoon your whole life. You've been so privileged your whole life. And he kind of looks off, and you get this flash of what you're really seeing is his dad is grabbing the back of his neck because he's getting ready to whip his back. But all you see is that first initial grab that Johan remembers. That kind of comes out of nowhere and just kind of clobbers you and then leaves.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to, like, make up thoughts here because I genuinely don't remember that leaving an impact on me. It might be that I didn't, like, really make a connection to it at that moment. I didn't know what to make of it, so I just kind of was like, okay, file that away for later. But yeah, it just, that entire scene was very much, I just got the impression of Kan Johan is looking down at the ants beneath his feet who think they know him, but actually they don't. So yeah, that to me wasn't really the standout moment in that. I think I was very consumed at that point by the foundation leader, the one that Suna ends up killing.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
his
The
like
chairman. Yeah.
yeah, and his like kind of dynamic with the women around him was really alarming to me.
Oh yeah.
Um, so I had hoped that we would get more exploration of that in the episode where it was presented to us, because obviously at that point I didn't know what the pacing for the show was really gonna be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was very focused on that and like trying to figure that part out.
Yeah, that was and with the way that Suna, like, as he's got his attention on Judge O and is like inviting her to sit down, all it took, one, the vibe was kind of off to begin with, but all it took was Suna very quietly whispering, you know, she's a judge. And it kind of like, you may, that one thing had a whole implication behind it where you're like, oh, all right, okay. That
But
told you
it's
so many things right off the bat. He does this a lot, and she's trying to keep him from doing it to someone who has a particular standing
power
and a particular power. Just be like,
Yeah.
she's a judge. Maybe you don't do this to a fucking judge, right? And something about the way she said it too, you could tell that it wasn't like, it's not like she was in on it. It's like, yeah, you can do it to whoever, but you may not want to do it to a judge. Something about her face really said, it's like, listen, I know you're fucking disgusting and you do this to women, and but just maybe don't do it to her. Which is just a testament to that actress who deserved awards.
But it's interesting to me. I didn't even like really clock that, but for me it was her like grabbing his hand.
Yeah.
And that immediately communicated this isn't something that she could subtly communicate with him, because if she could, she would have.
She couldn't just give him a look. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that she felt the need to physically remove his hand from her already, to me, like, spoke a lot. And that's where I first got the idea that their dynamic wasn't at all him being in power. Because if she was just an assistant, and she would probably be on the receiving end of that as well, and not feel she had the power to stop him from doing it to anyone else either.
Yeah. I got just the sense right off the bat that she, at the very least, from the very beginning, that she wasn't just his assistant. And I was like prepared absolutely for her to be revealed as like the one with like the real brains, the one who's really running the show. To the degree, maybe not so much. But I had that impression almost right from the get-go with her. And so it wasn't as surprising that she felt so comfortable just straight up, you know, grabbing his hand and telling him, you know, she's a judge. Maybe you fucking don't for a change. Which is interesting though, because she reins him in on his behavior and then proceeds to invade Johan's personal space in that fucking dance. That sends up so many red flags, and yet on the other hand couldn't possibly prepare you for the reveal that comes later. You just know that there's just something wrong with her. And you can't pinpoint it until it's pinpointed for you. But that whole dance, how did that dance make, I know how it made me feel. How did that dance make you feel? What were you thinking about for that whole sequence where she steps in?
I didn't like it. But not for a specific reason that I could pinpoint at that time. I think I might have said something to the effect of, it seems like she's gonna be the real enemy, and it was
Ooh, okay.
simply because of the music that I've now come to associate with her that vaguely reminded me of Jaws.
Ha! Ah, uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
um,
That's so
so
funny that
that
you had that inclination, because I didn't get the idea that she was gonna be the real enemy. It's funny, it happened in degrees with me
mm,
when it was revealed who she actually was, and that she was the one who, like jumped out the window. I was like, oh, okay, she is much more of a central villain. I didn't necessarily have her pegged as the villain of the series. And then as things went on, I was like, oh yeah, wow, so she's definitely like kind of, front and center, one of the main antagonists. But for whatever reason, passing understanding, it didn't really sink in that she was literally the villain of the series legit until the end of episode 15, which is way too fucking late. But sometimes I get really plot stupid the first time I'm watching something, and the obvious just passes me right by for a long time. And it really has to be, I should have guessed it from the second, it was revealed who she was. Because then obviously she's going to be the main antagonist. She checks all the boxes for the main antagonist.
I didn't even really think about that. It just it's so weird because her dynamics with the women around her was really what set me on edge early on. Like the fact that she came in and she like saved Judge O from this apparent dangerous person, but then the conversation that she had with Judge O very much felt like a more dangerous version of the conversations that Kan Yo-han has with people when he thinks they're stupid and he wants to manipulate them. And I was just like, I don't like this, go away. So yeah, and also like you mentioned in episode 1, it was very much apparent with the way that she interacted with the Minister of Justice that she was way too comfortable talking to authority figures in a very casual way to really not be just what she seemed. So
And
yeah.
there was something, and it's so funny that Johan doesn't even recognize her until she really arrives,
Yes!
right? It's so funny that he doesn't recognize her because there's something. One, their dynamic is so specific and so interesting, but like before he realizes who she is, she always acts so entitled to him, and in every respect, because she thinks she knows who Kang Yo-han really is. She, and as a similar foil to, Judge O has the more parasocial crush on him from afar, right? Doesn't actually know who he is. Suna thinks she knows exactly who Kang Yo-han is, but is way more just in love at him in a very stalkery way, obviously. And then there's Kim, who is the only person who actually gets to know the real Kang Yo-han and, loves and appreciates him for who he really, really is, as opposed to all these other people who actually have no idea. And it was her, but because she thinks she knows him, she's like just entitled to touch him that way. And he very clearly seems to take it of, he knows there's something, he doesn't like her. He never likes her, even when he doesn't remember who she is. He does not like her. And when she's so like forward in that moment, he's like, oh, see, this is why I don't like you. You're being really forward and entitled in ways that are like not okay, but I am going to as often as possible, softly divert you from being too intrusive until you force me to be more direct about it.
Yeah. Doesn't he at one point kind of like forcefully, but in a very like gentle way, remove her hands from his person?
Yeah, she's got her hands essentially like all over him during the dance, but there is one pointed moment where she puts one hand in his hair, and he reaches up and covers his hand with hers, and like has to exert some strength, but you know they're in public. But he does physically take her hand off, which is again really interesting considering that she's apparently like, you know, no, when old men do this to young women against their will, I'm going to stop that, and I'm a victim of that. But I'm in love with Yohan. Yohan clearly loves me. I know who he is. We know each other. He clearly doesn't recognize me, but I'm entitled to his body just like any couple would feel entitled to, which, like, 5-alarm fire.
Yeah. But also it's interesting to me because I think even before we found out that she was actually sexually assaulted by the dude, I very much got this predatory vibe from her, like she was a groomer. And it felt strange to say it because she never did anything sexual, but like with anyone besides Kanyohan, like Kanyohan aside, which was already very alarming. But like even when she was interacting with like Judge O, and when she was interacting with the kids at the like shelter place that she went to, all of that felt very groomish and like conditioning almost to me, and I couldn't explain it. And then as soon as we found out about her backstory, I was like, oh, this is learned behavior. This is the victim becoming the predator.
The cycle of abuse, and it's a combination of the cycle of abuse and just she survived, but in a very like maladaptive kind of way. She resorted to certain patterns of very not right behavior in order to survive the world that she grew up in, and considering that she grew up having to do that, formative years, she calcified into that, became who she was and how she sees the world and how she navigates the world. In really, really horrifying ways. She's wow. She's just, I mean, wow. Yeah.
Your fear for her was so cathartic to experience during the reactions, because it was like, oh, it's not just me.
Right? Yeah, no, she's so good at just there being something off about her right at the beginning, and she's just terrifying. And really part of it is her Kubrick stare. Do you know what that is?
I should know. I am a film student, but I can't remember.
Stanley Kubrick, the director, he
of The Shining.
Yes, of The Shining. Yeah. And Clockwork Orange and various things. One of his kind of trademarks that he became known for was having his villains do this. Sometimes it was directly at the camera, but sometimes not. But the point was that it's a very prolonged stare from the villain that has a certain unblinking, just unhinged intensity to it. And it would usually be a pretty long shot. And it's now become like a trademark in filmmaking, and it's used a lot to great effect because it's deeply unsettling. And it's just everywhere with her, everywhere, all the time. Almost every time you cut to her, she has this very still, very pointed, unblinking Kubrick stare going. And I've never seen it used so much and so often for a single character. But oh shit, did it work. Because she's terrifying. She's legit terrible. She like she's light as a feather. She's like a $1.10 soaking wet. You know, I could probably like throw her and I'm a weakling, but I would not go near her with it. You could not pay me. She's terrifying.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else specific you want to talk about?
Aside from the one screenshot, I figured since I've just been looking through them, and of course you haven't seen episode 2 in a while, Suna's dress for that whole end with the whole party and everything where she dances with Yohan, that dress is solid black and to the floor and like glittering, and she has these beautiful things hanging off of her arms, you know, but it's I think it's like the first time we see her in solid black, I believe, and it just so happens to be the scene where she manhandles Yohan within an inch of his life, which I found pretty telling.
It's very interesting as well because like it has that like glitz and glam that she so badly wants to project, but is constantly being reminded that she doesn't own because she wasn't born into it.
She's new money. Yeah. If there's nothing else about episode 2 that you wanted to point it out.
I mean, I just want to talk about the explosion that changed everyone's lives.
God, right, that's at the end of episode 2. Jesus. I'm over here like, so much happens in every episode. It's like, so is there anything else? The explosion, Brittany? That happens at the... One thing about the lighting, I almost used this as the screenshot moment, actually. The lighting in that scene with the ever-shifting color is so sublimely genius because it's such a matter of Kim has just found out all of these things, and then now, like, Yeon's in the room. It very much reflected Kim's current state of mind of just everything shifting and changing. You can't get a handle on anything. You can't get a handle on Yohan yet either. And it just perfectly reflects just the internal chaos of that moment in a scene that was not long enough. That was very rudely interrupted. And then, did you know, fun fact about when Yohan carries Kim out of the office? They wanted to, and sort of halfway tried, having Yohan actually literally carry like full princess carry, but they couldn't do it because Ji-sung, the man who plays Yohan, has back problems. So they like there's behind the scenes of them kind of trying to do it for a second, and he's like, no, I can't do it because of my back. So they had to figure out how else he was going to drag him. But they were originally going to do a princess carry.
And that's good enough for me.
Right? Like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh my God, it's the thought that counts. Like, so it didn't actually happen. The fact that you wanted to is enough for me.
Yes.
I had to share that. That is something that you had to know.
Can I quickly go on and on about because this for me was where I first started being like, okay, attention to the set design and the clothing and everything. Was so we have the portrait that the bomb was behind, and it is red and white specifically only. So my brain was like, from the third episode onwards, was Kim Ga-eun is blue, Kan Yo-han is red, and you can't convince me otherwise. And the reason why I was like, this is all perfect, and the portrait and everything is because if you take that into consideration, we have the flag of Korea, which is obviously white, blue, and red. And at the moment, and you have the portrait that is just red and white, and then you have the neutral good come in as blue, and suddenly you have the flag of Korea, you have the abolishment of this unbalanced society that was the dystopian world, and then cut to the beginning of episode 3, and you see a mashup of red and blue as the new portraits as they collide. And to top it off, and I am so extra, I'm sorry, but the explosion has the normal explosion effects, and then it literally has colored lighting of red and blue at the end of the explosion, as in they collide and it explodes, and I'm just like mind blown.
Yeah, and I was recently, as I was skimming through for, you know, for the shot that I wanted to use, I was having a moment at the beginning of episode 3 being like, the red in the painting is totally fire. Like, and now it's just sitting behind Johan. Did I even think of the blue thing or the Korean flag thing? No! And now I feel like a fool. Yet again. You just continue, you continue to educate. You continue to educate. That's so right.
I don't know if any of my speculations are at all accurate, but it's so fun.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, considering how, you know, we're talking, the show essentially talks about how you actually fight fascism in a country. And this is, you know, a South Korean, like, of course. Of course. Just, of course. Just, yeah, duh. I'm having the biggest duh moment in my head right now. Yeah.
So, yeah. So all my over-analysis is going to start from this point onwards, because that's where my brain went into overdrive.
Oh, yeah? Oh, beautiful. Okay, so the shot, what was the shot? Oh, yeah. There were, again, kind of as per usual with this entire show, there were a couple of really good, like, runners-up. I already mentioned, like, the multicolor thing happening at the end being an excellent reflection. There's also that great moment where it's when Johan talks about how there's no justice, there's just this deeply unfair game. And when he says that, they make a very specific point of having Kim sitting and Johan is standing. And he's standing, you know, at where his desk originally was, because the office hadn't been blown up yet. So his back is to the windows. And he has all of the light on his side. And he has the higher ground in that moment. He is so visually emphasized as to being the one in the right when he makes that unfortunate speech about how it's sad, but this is the way that everything works right now. And this is the game that we have to play. And I just love that he was making such a, again, like, sad, unfortunate, kind of dark speech on the reality of the situation, but they do everything they can visually to position him as the one who's right. And also it's like the closest they get to positioning him is like, he's almost a white hat in that moment. He's almost a white ideal in that moment. He's so right about everything.
I have another thought that we need to address after we've discussed the screenshot, because and before we move on to episode 3.
But the one that I did choose is actually a super subtle shot that here I've got to cycle through the first two. This shot, because it's a still, I can't show you, but it actually, this shot starts focused on the red cross that's above him, and then it shifts to a focus of Kim standing below in his garden. And the red cross really dialing into kind of the devil aspect of the devil judge. And considering he's just, shit, I'm blanking on it, but like, he's, Kim has kind of just seen a bunch of like Youngmin bullshit. And this is the episode where all of that starts happening. And he's had that, you know, dinner with Jojo and Yohan at this point, and he's had that conversation with Yohan. And the fact that they, I don't know if they digitally put this in or what, does not matter. The fact that they have that kind of positioned above him, kind of looming over him, and the fact that they shifted focus from that red cross down to him, like, those are the types of things that are very clearly weighing on his mind in this moment, was just a beautiful visual touch. Obviously the obviously the shot itself is, you know, the composition is beautiful and everything else that's going on.
And the coloring.
And the coloring
oh
and the, but oh
So
boy, that shift in focus and that red cross hovering above him was just peak this show. Absolutely. Could not go by without giving a shout out to that. Yes. Your thing, getting back to what you were saying.
I'm sorry, my brain just went again. This is going to be a problem because I'm like digesting the show as we're talking and coming up with new things as we go on. But I just realized, so from my perspective, it was basically established that Suna was the one who planted the bomb in Kan Yohan's office.
Pretty much.
Because they said it was someone from the foundation. And like, you know, who else would it really be?
Yeah.
If we go with that theory, it's interesting to me because as we talked about in episode 1, I said it felt like everything was set to go one course in Kim Go-eun's life until Kan Yohan disrupted it. And if we go with the same kind of theory on Kan Yohan's side, probably Suna planted the bomb, planning to have it set off as a warning sign to Kan Yohan to make him suspicious, to drive him closer to her. But he wasn't supposed to be in the building when that happened. He happened to be there because he wanted to confront Kim Go-eun. And Kim Go-eun ended up saving him from Suna because of circumstances. So it's just interesting if you're gonna like overanalyze the symbolism of the
Which is
the
so
one
funny, 'cause
thing.
the show clearly wants you to put that kind of thought into it. So overanalysis, nothing. This is one of those shows that's designed for that level of analysis. Yeah.
But it's just insane because then it's like, okay, so you're basically saying the one person who can protect Kan Yohan from Suna is Kim Go-eun. She's the one factor that she thought she'd factored in, but she hadn't.
Yeah, she positioned Kim to get close to Johan, you know, to be the weak spot, to do all of that, you know, evil mastermind thing. And yeah, it worked, but then it worked like too well because Kim wound up taking the spot that Suna thought belonged to her. Which is what makes a dinner scene later on in the series so fucking satisfying. But we'll get there when we get there.
Yes.
No, episode 3, where we actually get like the trial for Young Min, and we now know that Young Min is Minister Cha's son, which was just such a delicious reveal at the end of episode 2. And so now we're like, okay, Yohan's clearly gunning for this woman. We just don't specifically know why yet. Neither tactically nor personally are we exactly sure why he's aiming for her. That doesn't come up until, I think, somewhere in the second quarter, somewhere between episodes 5 and 8. But yeah, it's, first of all, his Youngman's trial and the flogging, it was like, obviously on one hand, like, yeah, this guy needs some fucking, well, 1, punishment, and 2, sense knocked into him. But then they actually do something I find really interesting with him, in that he's clearly, you know, a broken product of a deeply dysfunctional and just home. And he's actually, whereas we are first presented with him in his sports car and he's terrorizing people and he's an asshole in episode 2, in episode 3 and beyond, we actually see him, he's really just kind of a weak mess. And he still, like, deserved punishment. And, you know, considering the alternative could have been a lot of jail time, I figured it was a pretty fair punishment, like 30 lashings total. that wound up being separated because he couldn't take it. Yeah, it was like, it was a similar thing to kind of what they do with Juk-chan way later on. It was kind of like the opening teaser for that. But for Youngmin in particular, it was like, you almost, emphasis on almost, want to feel bad for him, but you directly see just a fraction of all the terror that he causes. And you're like, you needed to be put in your place, but now that you're there, I just kind of want to feel bad for you. Like, that's a rough gig. That household? I don't know. He brings up all kinds of conflicting things, and so I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on him and what happens to him.
It's difficult because I struggle to separate how I felt about the flogging with how I felt about him, because I don't think he deserved the flogging. At least not to the extent that he got it. But I don't see him learning from his mistakes in any other way than something that directly affects and impacts him. So that for me was very difficult because I wanted there to be a better solution, but I couldn't say what that solution would be, you know. With regards to the flogging itself, I was very angry because even though I felt that to an extent this was necessary, it showed me the very thing that I feared the show was leading us towards from the very first episode, which was things getting out of hand. And almost like the regression of a society that claimed to be so advanced and developed and not barbaric. The thing is, like, yeah, we have what's the guy that you just mentioned that gets electrocuted?
Juk-chan.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have him, and he's obviously an extreme case, and there will always be those extreme cases, but unfortunately, I look at it from the angle of living in South Africa where apartheid was a thing very much not long ago.
Right.
And even though there were the extremists, there are still also the people who, though they might not voice it as crudely and rudely as the extremists would, still think it in their minds. And that to me was very much what I was looking at when I saw the flogging. Is, yes, that guy doesn't represent everyone, but I think that he represents a scary amount of people that wouldn't admit that they feel that just as strongly as he does.
Yeah, and by extension, you could apply a lot of that to Juk-chan as well, and what we and they both, and that's another part of the genius of this show and the way it's been written and set up and executed. And that, yeah, I'm especially theoretically speaking, which is technically what we're talking about because we're talking about fictional events that didn't happen. Like, as a viewer, you know, you're like, fucking flog the rich asshole who terrorizes people. Please, dear God, yes. But then at the other time, like, on the other hand, the show makes you consider that from a more real application, because they have, you know, the kids mimicking what they saw happen, and you have Kim being like, what kind of precedent are we setting? And then there's the very weird kind of duality of, because on one hand, sometimes you need to fucking smack those people to make them understand and to give them any repercussions. But then on the other hand, you can't try to overtly lead a society like that, because most people are going to misapply it, misunderstand it, use it as an excuse to just be shitty themselves. Like, it's so funny how something like that cannot be applied to everybody. Because we all just think and internalize and come to different conclusions that then excuse certain behaviors. Which I thought was touched on really well in this show. And I mean, I was totally down. I was like so happy with the flogging. And then you see, you know, kind of more who Youngmin really is. And then you see, like, you know, the kids mimicking, and you're like, oh, that's right, but we can't actually run the country that way. Fuck. And everyone's a person, right? And I've been trying so hard to lean into the reality that everyone is actually a person. And even the most heinously evil figures that you can take out of history, you know, even the people who were like literally like born without the capacity for empathy or without the capacity for love, where something is like actually physically missing, even then it's like they are still a person, and people who cause that kind of damage to the people around him are usually just severely damaged themselves, and therefore the answer is always like actually seeing and loving that person, not letting them get away with anything. You still punish that person, but you can't, but not in extreme
that
ways.
way.
Yeah. Not in a way that robs them of the humanity that's still there.
Yeah. And also the thing is, like, it's very much for me that thing of you can't punish them in a way that would make them just as bad as you claim them to be.
Well, there are certain circumstances, and this may actually be one where I'm certainly inclined to agree. But that is also one of the things that, and one of the points that this show makes, is that there is a difference between, you know, the person who kills the serial killer to stop them from killing people, and the serial killer who kills innocent people. Like, there's not a moral equivalence there that is so popular and prevalent throughout media, because it's not portrayed in a way that makes an actual point. It's portrayed in a way of like, oh, I can't, you know, punch you because then I'm just as bad as you. And it's like, no, but in certain circumstances, yes.
No, obviously there's a lot more nuance to it, because it's also that thing of like a serial killer killing 50 people because he pulls joy from it is not equivalent to someone killing 50 people in a war zone where, you know, so it's, you have to, like, this is why humans have brains, and we need to be able to distinguish the differences and the moral nuances. But it was, for me, the problem with the flogging was not just the flogging itself. It was, as you said, the precedent that it set. The fact that it seemed like you would always have to outdo yourself with the next punishment. And I think what was great about it was that the show kind of addressed it with the next case that was covered with the rapist. I think he was a rapist, if I'm not misremembering.
For episode,
So, because that was like, but this is the natural next step. How are you gonna backtrack from the dangerous precedent that you've set?
And then to touch on that, he is deliberately escalating the punishments to get the public into a certain mindset that will, one, enable him to carry out his plan, that essentially saves the country, but also he's a dark knight in the sense that, you know, he doesn't care how people perceive him, he knows that he is doing something that needs to be done, and that these people absolutely need to fucking be removed from power and never heard from again, because they are cancers on society. But on the other hand, you know, and he grew up this way. He has every reason to be this way. He's pretty misanthropic. He doesn't really like people. I mean, people have constantly been misjudging him and assuming the worst about him since he was a child. He just doesn't think the most of the public at large. And part of this whole escalation and this whole, they're voting for this to happen. And he's got a very good point. They keep voting overwhelmingly for this to happen, for both better or worse, both things that are justified and unjustified, as a way of like, he's like, yeah, I'm saving everybody. I'm getting revenge for myself. And I am making the country much better for tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that I have to be some, you know, I have to be some big beacon that believes in just the goodness of humanity. Which I thought was a very interesting tack to take for a character in his position. So he's also kind of holding up a really ugly mirror to the public that most of the public doesn't even understand is being held up to them. Being like, you voted for this. And
it's a very interesting commentary on how social media executes people these days. And it's sad because it feels like very much in the same way that the cycle is in real life, that they might consider the ramifications of their actions for a moment when things get really bad, and then they just kind of brush it off and repeat the same mistakes again later on because the consequences don't affect them.
Yeah, there's a whole relationship to public perception and social media that runs very heavily through this show, which is astounding considering everything else this show does. It's a real, it should be studied for everything that it does all at the same time, and for all of the conversations that it starts among people. And there are about umpteen bajillion different aspects of this show and what it's trying to say, what it is beginning to say, and then leaving up to you to kind of come to the conclusion. But then there are the conclusions that the show does draw itself ultimately by the end, and there's just so much involved, and we're only really on episode 3. Episode 3 is, when you have the whole thing of Kim first arriving in Johan's house. And he explores the house, can't get into that one room, finally gets into that one room. It's Johan's childhood room, and that's when he gets the download from the housekeeper about there was a fire, he was technically adopted, he's a half brother, he was raised in this room. I think this is even when we find out why the dad treated him the way he did, when the dad says that he's too much like me, he looks too much like me.
Does it end with the firefighter falling off the roof?
Yes, that is one of the things. As Kim is finding out all of this further download about Johan's childhood and how he was raised and the death of Isaac and the fire and all that, we are seeing Johan finding the guy who has the watch. The great thing about the whole Johan finding the guy who has the watch and following him up onto the roof is that obviously when you first watch it, you're like, oh shit, Johan just led this guy to his death, took the watch, and then just like fucking bolted. But I have a theory that this is, even though it's not explicitly stated in the narrative, it's because it's literally just a moment that only us and Johan know happens throughout the whole show. We're the only two who know that this scene happens. And I think it was it was very deliberately shot to make us make that assumption. But considering how the whole thing is about making negative assumptions on what we see and not what we know, and that and that people in general don't consider context or don't consider that there might be things they don't know. I think that was deliberately a moment to be like, oh shit, Johan might be ultimately a piece of shit. It was another one of those signs that, like, is he ultimately good? Is he ultimately bad? This looks like a mark for the bad side. However, what did we actually see? I don't think Johan intended to make that guy fall off the roof. I think he just wanted to get the watch back. I don't think he particularly, obviously, he wasn't bothered that the guy fell off. But the guy thought that Johan was about to, like, either physically kill him, beat the shit out of him, whatever. But Johan didn't say anything. Johan didn't say, I'm gonna kick your ass. Or Johan didn't say, I'm gonna torture you. He doesn't say anything. He just follows the guy. He's walking. And he keeps walking up because he wants the watch, and then the guy trips and falls off the roof. So I don't think he intended for any harm to come to that guy. I think he just wanted the watch. That's my theory anyway.
I wonder, because he did seem surprised to find the watch on the guy's wrist.
Yeah, he was like, oh, you didn't sell it.
Yeah, so I don't know if he maybe, if that wasn't the intention when he originally approached him. Because it seemed like he only realized that the guy still had the watch on when he went down to look at his body. I mean, there's a lot of reasons for him to pursue the man in the way that he did without intending to send him to his death.
He definitely could have wanted information as well, absolutely. But we are given the notion that he was specifically looking for the watch because in a previous episode, we get that scene that, again, going off of the same theme here, where he's going and looking among, like, you know, the homeless vagrants for someone, we don't know who, but he's checking guys' wrists for watches. And that's actually another scene that's worth mentioning, because that one guy, like, pushes Johan, and Johan just goes off on him and is, like, choking him against the rail or whatever. And obviously in that context, you're like, okay, slight overreaction, Johan. But then when you go back and watch it knowing what you know now, he was pushed on his back where his cross is. And now that makes sense as to why he would snap that way. Similar in the way in episode 3 when he finds the guy who planted the bomb, or who was paid to plant the bomb. And he kind of, like, Johan kind of goes off in a way of, like, he's dragging that guy toward fire. And isn't stopped, you know, until Kay essentially stops him, but we don't really have the fire context fully yet. We know there's something related to fire because of certain images that we've been shown since then, but it still looks like a rather unhinged moment. And then in hindsight, you're like, completely understandable. Also, the guy planted a bomb that damn near killed him and his future husband. So, like, really.
But I actually believed originally that it had a lot more to do with Gaon. And even, like, as I was watching it, looking back on it without the full context, I started to believe that, oh, it's like he was maybe triggered by the notion that the person who looks like his brother almost died in front of him again because of this man.
That was totally another part. Yeah. Even Kay says, he was like, I feel like you did that because of Kim. And Johan kind of doesn't answer. In a way that says, yeah, that's totally what I just did.
Okay, but before we continue on to episode 4, can we just talk about the very unexpected and then they became roommates trope?
I know! I was not expecting a whole move-in at episode 3. I was like, what are we talking about? And then the immaculate, like, Beauty and the Beast vibes of don't go in the West Wing. You know? He's over there looking around this dark house, exploring
I'm so glad it
things.
wasn't just me.
Can't go in there, goes in there.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And the like beast watching from the eaves as Beauty sits with his sister. Well, not sister.
Oh,
at
yeah.
that point, I thought it was sister, but niece. Like that killed me.
Yeah.
I loved that so much.
The gothic romance vibes of episode 3, like, they are not to be trifled with. Like, yeah.
And the wound cleaning.
Yeah. What? Like, what do you mean? Just, I don't. Yeah. Yeah. And that whole giving. And we still don't know this, but the fact that, you know, Kim got a wound on his back that then healed, which is the whole point of in episode 4, which, oof. You know, that's the whole point of Yeon's like, oh, it healed, because his never did, but we still don't know that yet. Was another great way to just mirror them and their differences.
And just the very subtle fact that his tattoo looks like a phoenix rising from the ashes
of a fire. You know. It's one of the interesting things about Kim and Yohan's relationship, I mean, besides everything, is when Yohan is looking at Kim and when Yohan's looking at Isaac. And it happens less and less as the show goes on, obviously, as he gets to know Kim more and isn't necessarily like getting over the hump of the trauma that involved with his brother's death, but like is able to put a little bit more
put it aside.
Yeah, and put it aside when like looking and dealing with Kim. Whereas very on in the early days, Yohan has those moments. Like, Kim will enter a room and Yohan, just for a second, will have to, like, shake himself out of it and be like, no, that's not your brother, come back to life, right? Yeah. It's really interesting in the moments. And you can always tell, because he's a very good actor, you can always tell when he's seeing Isaac and when he's seeing Kim.
Yeah.
And for everybody in that house, for all those poor, sad people in that damn cavernous house, the clomping footsteps in that house used to kind of drive me nuts because I didn't really get it. I just thought it was a poor sound choice. But considering how the sound is immaculate in every other aspect of the show, I was like, why? Why are we constantly hearing the echoing footsteps of these clomping people throughout this house? And it is, of course, just another way to emphasize just the big... It's like they're living in a symbol of everyone's grief and trauma. It's massive, it's big, it's dark, makes you feel
empty,
very small and lonely and kind of creeped out, and everyone's exhausted by living there. It is mostly empty. A lot of stuff's not even been used. It's been covered over with plastic. Like, and of course the footsteps just emphasize that.
Yeah.
That took me embarrassingly long to finally clock in on. Because again, sometimes things just entirely pass me over. And this is literally just because this is just the director of photography showing off. They're just showing off. They're just literally like, I don't know what else to tell you. This is just, they're like, I know what would make a fucking iconic shot. Let's do it because Yohan's an icon. Like, there's literally no other reason for them to have this shot, for it to exist, other than that it looks amazing. It frames him beautifully. What the hell are these, like, lines of light as opposed to lines of shadow that, like, you would kind of normally expect? He's framed, but, like, not really. He's slouched against the door, like the king that he is. And, like, it's just such a flex on the director of photography's part that I had to shout it out, because it just makes me feral. This is so extra. This is such an extra shot for no, like, real reason other than let's just flex on the kind of amazing shot that we can set up. Like,
And my memory might be deceiving me,
mm-hmm.
but I'm pretty sure he does this exact pose in episode 16 as well, when there is light at his back again.
Oh, does he? I haven't chosen the frames for episodes 9 through 16 yet, so I'll keep an eye out for that.
But yeah, that is a great shot.
Right? That's just good. That's just good composition. That's just solid ass. And I love that it was just a flex. It was just a flex. Like what?
I'm just so sad though, because okay, so we originally intended to do the full 1 to 6 episodes, and then obviously
1 through 8. We were really ambitious.
1 through 8. Oh goodness. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So that didn't work. So we're gonna be cutting it off here. We should actually technically do it up until episode 4, but it is 1 p.m.
It is late.
1 a.m.
It is 1 a.m. for you. We need you at peak capacity for discussing episode 4.
Because there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're gonna be cutting it off here. Then we shall be back for another session over on my channel here to finish off the remaining episodes, and then we shall move over to Brittany's channel for the rest of the glory that is Devil Judge.
9 through 16 here, 1 through 8 there. It's just apparently 1 through 8's gonna be in a couple of different parts, because we can talk about this series
forever. Oh goodness. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to check out Brittany's channel, and I'll see you guys again next time. 再见。